Jules, I want to get into this a little bit more about the financial impact. And we don't have all the pieces. We can't give you exact numbers, but guess what? Neither does Laporta, right?
Yeah.
So just a reminder, those levers that he pulled, he sold off chunks of the club that generate money for them. Right. So from the TV deal to Barca Studios so with the idea being that we're going to grow, we're going to generate even more money. So even though the percentage, we've sold a fixed percentage, but even though to use the words of a previous prime minister here, a very recent prime minister in the UK, we're just going to keep growing the pie, right? And so it's fine that we're going to use that money to invest and so on, right? I think people get that concept.
Yeah.
I think unless you're Nostradamus, you can't say for certain it's going to succeed, it's going to fail. You can't assess the risk, and many, including us, said, wait a minute, this is a totally unnecessary risk.
Yeah.
The immediate impact now, I think, what is it going to be? I think one of the impacts is simply Barcelona in the Europa League. They're not going to be in the Champions League. They're going to get less exposure.
Yeah.
Less exposure means that when you go to sponsors and stuff, you're going to get less money. I don't think it's going to be tremendous.
No, because they'll be back next season for sure.
They'll be back in the Champions League, but the problem is, it's one of those things like Bruges are in the Champions League every year too, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just a question of being there and being in the latter stages, of being able, do we look like a rising power that, sponsors, especially in this is the other thing. I think, we can all read the newspaper, right? There's a global recession right now. There's cash is drying up, right?
Yeah.
So sponsors want to jump in on something get in early on something they think is going to grow. So the minute you kind of lose that idea of growth, it becomes that much harder.
Yeah.
And the reason I said, people said, oh, you're for austerity. But the reason I was against this in the summer, I would have said, no, just Kessie, Christensen, maybe sell somebody, but try to grow with the kids rather than go and spend all this money and pull the levers, is that growth is growth. So if you're growing from a lower position, it's easier, right? The way Barcelona went in, how are they going to grow? They would have had to, reach the Champions League final or semifinal or whatever. So that makes that part that much harder.
Yeah, definitely. And they owe still some money to some of their players, including Frankie de Jong, who deferred their wages through the pandemic, etc., which will be costly. And then, as long I'm all up for growing and everything, as long as you see progression on the pitch with what your manager is doing, what your players are doing, etc., which at times we've seen, and at times it's a bit more difficult to see where this team is going. I still think that Xavi should still stay there until the end of the season, and what you do next season, depending on the next few months now. But that's where I've got an issue with, is where is this team heading? I still think that Xavi could be a very good coach, but like we mentioned earlier, I think Nagelsmann showed his weaknesses, showed his flaws, showed maybe that he's just not ready yet to be one of the top, and if he's not one of the top, then it would take more time for Barca to go back to the top.
I want to talk more about Xavi because I think, there's a complex discussion to be had there, but before we move on to that, just to close out the financial bit of this, because a lot of people have asked, does this mean that they won't be able to strengthen the team in January?
Yeah.
I think there's still money there because they sold those chunks for a lot of money. So if they were to double down and do it and address certain positions where they feel they need to, I personally hope they don't, because to me it would just be silly at this stage. What are you going to do? It's like to increase your chances of winning La Liga. That's it may bring you prestige, but it's not going to move the needle financially doing that. Given the way Laporta's operated until now, I would imagine he's running around with a list of right backs and left backs and maybe a central defender. But if they do have to sell, these saleable assets, the ones that are going to get you a ton of money, are obviously your young players. Yeah. It's Pedri, it's Gavi,
and De Jong.
I would say Ansu Fati.
Yeah, as well.
De Jong's slightly different. De Jong is on a huge salary.
True.
So I don't think, if De Jong is a good World Cup or if he plays well for Barcelona, I think, but you'll get 50, 60 million for De Jong probably. But I don't think it's somebody who's really going to make you, and then you need to replace him, right? Yeah. I don't think he's in the same angle as Pedri, Gavi, and Ansu. I wouldn't sell Pedri, Gavi, and Ansu unless I really had to.
Yeah, unless you have to.
And especially with Ansu, obviously I want to see him on the pitch more.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN+.